And they finally came back and said, hey, we're actually not going to hire for this role right now. And they hired someone for that role who had been knocked out in the first round. And
What?
when I tell you, I was just beside myself because I was so upset. I felt so disrespected. I felt like my time was wasted. I was just so deeply hurt. I don't want to be a one and done. My goal is to write a series of books. My goal is to write at least 3 books. And when I was talking to new agents and I was talking to different publishers, they were all like, hey, we see your book is selling. It's still selling every single month. We're still seeing units moving. But we, in order to really know like that it's worth like investing to do a second book, we really want to see 10. We really want at least 5,000, but ideally 10,000. Vulnerability always feels disgusting for me. You know, they have that quote, like, check on your strong friends. I think it's also like, check on your successful friends. By a lot of measures, I am successful. And I think when you've achieved a certain level of success, people put you in this like perfection box.
You are listening to My Rejection Story, hosted by Alice Draper. Hello, and welcome to another episode of My Rejection Story. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Kimberly Brown. Kimberly is a career and leadership expert. She's the author of Next Move, Big Move, and generally an all-round go-getter. I love her book because it's much more than just a guide on advancing in your career. The storytelling is rich and entertaining, and generally the advice had me thinking of things that I hadn't been thinking about before, which doesn't happen with every book. Kimberly, welcome so much to the show. Kimberly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
So in the green room, you touched on the fact that you were once rejected from a job and that set you up for a great redirection. So to start off the conversation, could you share that rejection story with us?
Oh, definitely. We're hopping right into it. Got it. This is probably one of my favorite stories to tell for a bunch of reasons. I even share it during one of my biggest keynotes because I feel like as a career and leadership expert, many times people are like, well, you've clearly gotten every job you've ever applied for. Like, obviously, you know how to interview. And I'm like, yeah, but I've still experienced rejection. So I spent a large part of my career in higher education. I was in higher ed for nearly 10 years working at a few different universities. So I was at a certain time in my career where I was like, okay, I am finally ready to apply for director of career services jobs. And I had at least the minimum years of experience. I had worked my way through various facets of the office setting at a few different universities, and I was ready. And a role opened up at some place where I had amazing relationships. I'd actually previously worked there before. I knew that like, okay, this could be it. I should be really good for this. So I went through the interviews, and anyone here who is familiar with higher education and listening, you know that interviewing in higher ed is a little ridiculous. They are known for having multiple rounds. And by multiple, I mean 3, 4, 5, some of them being full day long interviews, presentations, interviews with like one person, sometimes up to 20 people in a room. It's excessive. So when you commit to interviewing, it's like 2 to 3 months sometimes before you get an offer. So I was going through the process. I thought I was doing really, really well. As a matter of fact, I knew I was doing really well. And I got to the final round. I met the president of the university. We were talking about all the things, start date. And I joke and I say, I knew what I was going to wear. This was a job that was going to be in New York City. So I already knew, okay, this is the trench coat and the boots that I'm going to wear because I knew it was fall. So I had like the whole look. I saw myself getting off the train, walking into the office. Like, y'all, I was ready. I was so ready. And I got the call and they said what every candidate hates. And they were like, oh my goodness, if we had 2 roles, we would have loved to hire you. And first of all, anyone who's a hiring manager, stop saying that. Stop. Nobody wants to hear if there were 2 because there's not. That's it makes everyone feel worse when we hear that. And I was devastated. And I've never really cried too much over job offers. I've been more angry or disappointed, but I was like almost depressed. Like I remember going back to my current office and I just like shut the lights out of my office. Like I didn't want to talk to anybody because I felt like that job was mine. But lo and behold, about a week or so later, they called me back and they're like, hey, we're so sorry, but the candidate we offered the job to actually rescinded their acceptance. Would you still be interested? And I was like, of course, like clearly this is for me. It's a part of my journey. Like it's perfectly fine. Let me go grab the boots. Let me go grab the trench coat. Like I'll be perfectly fine. I was so ready. And they said, okay, we want you to come back in one more time, but we talk start date, we talk salary, but we never got a formal offer letter on the table. We talked about all the things. They wanted me to come back in and just sit with the team. And because I'd worked with some of them before, they wanted to just like have that final, but they're like, that's it. Like this should be done. And we scheduled it and then it got rescheduled. And then we scheduled it. And then there was a pause, like, hold on one sec, we're going to get back to you. And it was about 2 weeks. And they finally came back and said, hey, we're actually not going to hire for this role right now. And they hired someone for that role who had been knocked out in the first round. And
What?
when I tell you, I was just beside myself because I was so upset. I felt so disrespected. I felt like my time was wasted. I was just so deeply hurt. I actually, at that time, that was probably September, almost October, I stopped applying for jobs. There was some restructuring happening on my current team at the university I was at. So they were like moving some of my team and changing my role a bit. So I was just angry all around. So I stopped applying for jobs. But I say that rejection set me up for redirection in a multiple ways because two things happened. So, one, in December, I got connected with an opportunity and it was in corporate America. And I was thinking about corporate loosely, but hadn't necessarily dipped my toe in. And the connection was like through a bunch of different sources. So, but we never actually talked on the phone. And they're like, this sounds like the person who told me about you. It sounds like what they said you'd want. And I was like, oh, okay. Would you be interested in applying? And let's say that was like a Monday, mind you, like the Monday before like Christmas and the holidays.
Oh,
So
wow.
I
Yeah.
so I interviewed like that Tuesday. They brought me back in that Thursday. I came back in again like a few days before Christmas. I had to do drug testing because it was in finance at that time. I did that on Christmas Eve. I feel like my parents drove me to do like the full background verification. And I'm in my 30s at this point. So having my daddy drive me to go get drug testing for a job was its own thing. But I had an offer and I was able to resign before the new year from my job and move into corporate. And that job literally changed my experience, changed my life, changed my business. It was the perfect merger. And I think the second thing about that redirection was that toward, I think it was in May or June of that following year, because I was right at the top of the new year, they actually disbanded that Office of Career Services, merged it with someone else. And I could have potentially lost my job or been doing work I was no longer interested in. So sometimes, as much as rejection hurts, I do believe that sometimes that's the universe, God, whatever you believe in. For me, God, like it was that way of protecting me. Because I've never
Yeah.
been fired from a job. I've never lost a job or been laid off. Like, thank goodness, but I most likely would have been laid off or put in a position where I was just so over the job and not interested that I would have wanted to resign anyways with that redirection that happened.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing this. I mean, firstly, that sounds like psychological torture, the whole
Oh,
interview
yes.
process. Then
Yes.
getting called back, told you have the job, and then not getting the job. And I think I just want to highlight like those rejections, I think, are the ones that suck the most, where
Oh, yeah.
you're like almost in the door and then it's just you're like basically shoved out of the door if we had to be metaphorical about it versus
Yeah.
other sort of things we apply for where we didn't even get like our feet in the door. We didn't even get a taste of what it could be like. And I love that you framed it now as redirection. But I think, and just like I say this, we talk about this in so many of the interviews. When you're in the thick of it, like you don't have that perspective.
Oh, of
As you
course.
said, when you felt like super depressed, you probably weren't thinking, oh, that I could lose this job because these bad things are happening. They're going to shut this department down. If you could take us back to kind of what you were going through in the thick of it, like, do you remember some of the feelings you felt and like when you like heard the news of that you're not getting this job and that it's going to someone who was kicked out after round one? Did you say round one of the interviews?
Hmm.
Do you remember when you heard the news and kind of what feelings viscerally you were feeling?
At that point, I was just angry. I was so angry because I think I went through the sadness the first time I was rejected and said I didn't have it. I was like, okay. And I knew I was good enough, which I appreciate knowing in that moment because I had the minimum level of experience. I had done phenomenal work. I had been presenting at conferences. The former president for like a association in my industry at that point. I was young, and I knew part of the issue was that in the field of career services, in higher education in general, people get that director level job and they never leave. So it is
Mm,
not unfamiliar for someone to land that job and they've been there 20 years, 30 years, et cetera. So when jobs open up, there's been a lot of people at that second tier of like the assistant director, associate director who've been waiting to get promoted. So I used to say with my own coaches and my own network, like I was competing against folks who could be my aunties, my uncles, or even my parents. So I knew I was young. So,
mm,
but that was nothing I could do. I was nothing I could do
yeah,
about my age. So at that point though, I think I was just livid that I feel like they wasted my time and
yeah,
something was happening that they did not share and they should have never called me back.
yeah,
And I didn't feel like they apologized and acknowledged the process. I think that a lot of companies, higher ed, inside and outside, secular, non secular, all the things, I feel like people, they don't want to apologize to candidates or admit wrongdoing because they don't want a lawsuit. But I do
mm,
think that when messed up things happen, it's important to acknowledge and say, hey, we
yeah,
messed up here and we sincerely apologize for wasting your time and anything. At that point, they just, I think it may have even came as an email. And I was like, what? Like, so you've spent months with me and you're going to send me an email like this? I was so
yeah,
mad. I was so beside myself angry. And it took a while to kind of get over that anger. And I think when you're applying for jobs, and I teach my clients when I'm doing coaching, like the higher you go, the fewer the opportunities that there are to apply to. So it's not like there were like a plethora of other jobs. I was looking for assistant director or manager level roles. So each process you went through, you spent a lot of time in. So I was just at this, like, I'm angry about this. I feel kind of lost because there wasn't anything else at that time period. Higher ed works in seasons. So people
mm,
generally like to leave when the students leave. So if you don't kind of get in at the beginning of the semester, you have to kind of wait till the middle of the year. But a lot of people don't like to leave in the middle of the year. They wait till like May, June.
yeah,
So I knew that that was kind of the time wasn't on my side. So I was above all angry. And I think I'd probably say I identified with being stuck. Like, so what am I supposed to do now?
yeah, yeah. I like that you highlight also kind of how these rejections often are on the rejector's side. Like
Mhm,
when they're really nasty, it's more about them and not about us.
mhm,
If you know your time being wasted like that, for
mhm,
example, it makes me think of someone I know who she was supposed to have a role as a psychologist, like working kind of in house for a government institution. And there was some paperwork problems, so it got pushed back by like a few months while she was like following up with like various bureaucratic papers that were just she didn't know about were missing. And the role was guaranteed. And when she finally had the papers in order, they ghosted her. So instead of sending an email, like she had to track them down. And she said by the time she finally got through to someone and just phoning people every day, the person sounded taken aback that it was her because they clearly wouldn't have answered if they did like knew.
oh
And
my
then
goodness.
like had some like really bad excuse like we want to make opportunities for other people or something like something that didn't make sense. And she had moved in, put her stuff in the office and everything, and then they said, "Oh, you need to go follow up and get these paperwork before like you can start." So that, you know, that stuff sucks, but it's not about you. If that's being dealt with so unprofessionally, it's very much like the company, the bureau, like whoever is in charge would not, if they were running things well, the rejection wouldn't have been so bad.
Oh, 100%. I think anything that happens like that is an indication that that's probably not a company you want to work for. And I will also validate that you don't care when you've been interviewing and you're just hurt and upset. But when you think about
Yeah.
it in hindsight, it's like, do you really want to work for a company that treats their candidates like this? I remember I was interviewing for another role at another company one time, and we were getting toward the final rounds, and they wanted me to do this project. And the project was going to take significant time. It wasn't something that I was like, oh, I could do this in an hour and it'll be done. It was going to take research, writing, everything to submit to them. And for me, I'm always sensitive as a candidate when you have to submit work that they can use and not hire you. So I was like, I would love to speak with the recruiter or the hiring manager and just learn about the sense of like where I am in the process. Like, is this 2 people are getting this project, or is it like 6 people are getting this project? Like, where am I, so I can kind of understand where I am in the process? And they're like, oh, hold on one sec, we'll get back to you. And then they got back to me and said, hey, we're actually not going to be hiring for this role right now. So we're going to put everything on pause. And when I tell you, I was like, so you asked me to do work. And if
For
I
a
didn't
role that you're not
ask,
hiring for.
I would have done this. And then you wouldn't have hired me because you decided to go this way. And
Yeah.
mind you, all these things have deadlines. They're like, oh, yeah, we're going to need this in like 48 hours. Da, 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 da. I'm so happy that I asked, because that's another time I would have been beside myself angry. And I actually talked to like their director of HR at that time, because I was like, I had a contact there, and I was like, hey, I just need you to know that this happened, and it's wildly inappropriate and also damaging when people are thinking about interviewing at your organization. Like, I don't think you could pay me to take a job here at this point.
Mm.
Like, there's no sign-on bonus that would make me want to go through this process again.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
What I want to ask you about is, I think that what you did, asking those questions, is really important, and it kind of forces that transparency before you waste your time. And when I was graduating university, I was already freelancing as a writer, and I studied in South Africa, so I was working for American clients, and I was making more money from American clients than most entry level jobs would pay me. So I was asking questions because I was curious about what like a full time job would look like. So I'd apply. They'd send me like a long test of like that's going to take you a full day, and I would reply and be like, "What's the salary range of this?" Like, kind of like I wanted to know things before I put the time in.
Yes.
But I looked at my kind of approach as coming from a place of privilege because I knew that I had other options. And I know that a lot of my peers who didn't have other options were like, oh, I don't want to turn them off by asking these questions, like until I've made it to the end and I have like the power in my hands or something. So I don't know if you ever deal with that with your clients where they're kind of operating from a place where they feel like they don't have as many options, or that asking these questions will hurt them, or that they're not in a position to be picky, at those sorts of things. Is that ever something that comes up?
Oh, 100%. I think that the best time to interview for a job is when you don't necessarily need it.
Yeah,
When you're not
yeah,
coming from like a scarcity mindset of like you have to move, and or a mindset where it's like anything is better than what I have right now. Like, please. Like, you, and then you start to fantasize about what it's going to be like, and you get there and you've seen the role, you've seen the interview process through rose-colored glasses, so you're not even interviewing objectively because everything feels better. I teach candidates that you have to really and truly interview the company in the same way they're interviewing you. So you should be empowered to ask questions, empowered to get the information you need so you can make an educated decision, because nothing is worse than moving into a new job and you're there under 30 days and you're like, why did I do this? I could have stayed at my last company. So I really work to make sure that you have the confidence and are empowered to ask, because their answers are very telling. Even if it takes some time to get back to you, they should be giving you these answers so that you can make an educated decision.
yeah, yeah. I love that. And yeah, that's such great advice. The answers should be coming to you. So I want to move up the conversation to something that actually made me reach out to you, which is recently you posted on LinkedIn and Instagram, and I think you wrote in your newsletter as well, asking your community for support to order more copies of your book, which we released a few
Mhm,
years ago.
mhm.
I'm in the UK now, but I ordered a copy and it's back in my
Ah,
apartment in Dubai, so
thank
I can't
you.
hold it up, unfortunately. But yeah, I want to know first from you, just so that listeners have context. Can you share with them a little bit about what you asked of your community and why you asked this?
Oh my goodness. And I think I'm excited to talk about it, but it also makes my stomach turn, for a multitude of reasons. Vulnerability is something I'm working on. But so I released my book, Next Move, Best Move, Transitioning into a Career You'll Love, in 2021. So pandemic times, June 2021, it came out. During that time, like many new authors, I knew jack about publishing. Jack. And I feel like there's a misconception in the book writing world, especially traditional publishing, that so much emphasis is put on getting your book proposal done and getting your manuscript done. And then it's like, oh my God, everything is done after that. And it's like, no, that is where the work begins because you have to sell units. Um, And I will say my book did better than most. Like the average author doesn't even sell 1,000 copies. The average author never even hits 2,500 copies in the lifetime that the book is available. And my book sold around, I think right now we're almost at 4,000 copies sold in the last 3 years. So by traditional standards, like the book did amazing. However, I don't want to be a one and done. My goal is to write a series of books. My goal is to write at least 3 books. And when I was talking to new agents and I was talking to different publishers, they were all like, hey, we see your book is selling. It's still selling every single month. We're still seeing units moving. But we, in order to really know like that it's worth like investing to do a second book, we really want to see 10. We really want at least 5,000, but ideally 10,000. And I serve as a keynote speaker. And my company does leadership developments in lots of companies. And I realized a lot of flaws in my marketing and how I went through the book process. And I was very hesitant to even ask. I thought like it's out there. I'm talking about it. People should know. People should get it. I have 25,000 followers on Instagram. I have almost 8,000 on my newsletter. Like I have engaged folks. However, people being engaged doesn't mean that they'll buy.
Yeah.
So I was like, I need to be transparent and share. Like, if you loved, and when I tell you the stories about my first book, the transformation that is provided, even my neighbor one time, I feel like my neighbor reached out. She's like, Kimberly, I followed your salary negotiation framework and I negotiated my salary. And she added like, I think $20,000 to her salary. Like, I have
Amazing.
clients who bought it in 2021, helped them get like the first job, and then they use the process again to get a next job because they built a career strategy. So I know it works. But some feedback I got from one of my coaches was that I position myself as a speaker, not as an author. I lead speaker first, not author first. So I don't kind of push like you need to get my book. And I was like, this is my time. If I want to be an author, if I want
Mm.
to write multiple books, I need to ask folks to show up and to purchase a copy of a book. First of all, it's always on sale on Amazon. Like at this point, like it's always like 30% off right now. It's like $13. I'm like, after all the advice that I've given for free in my podcast and speaking and everything else, I think folks can pay $13 because again, it has to be a physical copy, not a Kindle copy, which I think is also things that people don't know about book publishing is that physical copies of the book are what counts toward your sales.
Mm.
I'm not trying to hit a list. So you can buy it from anywhere. I don't need to worry about like, I need a certain many here or there, whatever. It's like you can get it from anywhere. So I asked my audience, I was like, this is transparently. I want to write another book. I want to publish traditionally. I don't want to self-publish or hybrid publish. You know my stuff is good and you're listening and you're following. Please support me by buying a book. Literally on Amazon is $13 right now. And I know your Amazon cart was more than that yesterday and you don't even know what you ordered.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. $13 on the Amazon cart for most professionals is not a big help.
exactly.
So I loved that post so much, and I was just like, and it touched on so many things. First, I want to share quickly, we had the first episode that came out, Geraldine DeRuyter. She talks about how she got this really bad review in the New York Times for her book. And that when she read that review, like immediately she felt sick and, just like the worst nightmare as an author. And so she went on to her community to ask them to just not use that review as the thing that's making their decision. But the result of that was that her community turned the book into a bestseller because they were so angry at the review. And
I
so it was
love
like
that.
a reaction to the review. But I think that this idea of bringing our community along for the ride is so scary. Like, it's one thing for us to create the work, put it out there, and hope like for the best. But asking your community to get you to 10,000, cross the 10,000 mark, or asking your community to actually sharing this review and bringing it into their attention, it's terrifying, but it's often that's where like the most magical things happen because now the community is invested in the process and it's not all happening behind closed doors. They know that you're a real person who like is not just this finished product. You have your vulnerabilities too, and I think that's what's so beautiful about being vulnerable, but it's also what's so scary because we just don't know how people are going to react.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, kind of what your mental process was to get yourself to be vulnerable, and also kind of what the reaction of your community was.
Oh my goodness. So let's first just I'll share that my stomach still hurts talking about this. Like when I first saw your email about this podcast, part of me was like, I got to tell people how I failed. Like that means I have to like talk about the bad things, and that's not how I've
And that's
shown
not a
up.
failure because, as you said, most authors never cross the 500 book mark. Like most books just
They don't do
don't.
well.
Yeah, they don't do well. So hitting in the thousands is a huge success on its own.
I
Yeah.
think for me, I want to help demystify the process and also take accountability. I think I'm naturally hard on myself. So, but I'm working on like the realities. I did not know what it took to sell a book. I had no idea. I thought I did the things. I mean, I had a PR team, I had a social team, but I've always positioned myself as like, this is what I've done, and I will give you the most perfected version. And my standard of excellence is generally very, very high. I do not like to show the work in progress or the story behind. I don't like to show like the grit behind the glamour. And I'm learning as a business owner, and more importantly, as a personal brand, the grit behind the glamour is the part that people latch onto. It's what humanizes you, and it's what helps people support you moving forward. And I wish I understood that when it came to sales and marketing, that like just showing folks the done doesn't allow them to follow along and invest and be excited in your success for all the things. And I also think I also just don't ask, right? Like I just don't ask,
Mm.
period. I don't ask. And what do they say? Like if you don't ask, like you can't expect to receive.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm like, I needed to kind of, put my big girl panties on and be like, this is what I want. This is what's important to me. And if this book changed your life or that of your friends, then I need you to show up and show out. And if you don't need a copy
Yeah.
for you, there's someone in your life who does. I think the beautiful thing about my book is that I wrote it for the magic middle. So I
Mm.
joke and say that the magic middle for me is professionals, probably, I say a really mature 27-year-old, that person who graduated school, went right into the workforce. They are higher than they should be. They're generally the youngest person in the room and they love it, but they never played the game. They never really thought about mentors and sponsors. They got there by sheer work, all the way to the 42-year-old who's probably being managed by that 27-year-old and hating it,
Mm.
absolutely hating it, because they also didn't do those things. And they had that old school, almost like they have baby boomer parents who were like, hey, put your head down, work, you'll be fine. And they just thought it'd be okay. And they wake up and this 27-year-old is managing them and they hate it. That's who I wrote my book for, like that span in the middle. But I've seen great success with folks in college getting their first job and executives. And I was so shocked to see that. So I know the book works. And if I believe in it, I should have no shame in sharing it. And
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
something I had to kind of normalize for myself. Like, you wrote something that is really good. You've documented success. Um, why would you be ashamed of sharing something that works, that you're proud of? And I had to kind of work through some of that. I think me sharing in general, I've had a lot of interesting life experiences. And over the past few years, I've slowly but surely tried to work on pulling the curtain back and allowing people to see and get to know who I am.
Yeah.
Because I think in the social media culture that we're in, I think we like putting people on pedestals. We like seeing perfection. Like for every influencer who is like gives like the raw deal online, we also like that perfectly curated, like, do they even really live in that house look? Like, I don't think you could do anything there. Like, you can't touch anything. And I
Nara
feel
Smith with her.
oh my gosh, like, you want potato chips, so you make potato chips at like 11 o'clock at night from scratch. Like, we also like that and we
Yeah.
glorify that, but there's room for us to really show who we are. And I think I have a fear of like, so if people really see who I am, if they really know who Kimberly Brown is, the good, the bad, and indifferent, will they still show up?
Mm.
So
Mm.
I'm personally working through that still,
Yeah.
but by making this ask, it's helping slowly but surely.
Yeah, yeah. And the reaction from your community, did your perspective change after sharing it and seeing their reaction, or does it still feel as terrifying as it did before you posted?
vulnerability always feels disgusting for me. So in general, like it doesn't necessarily feel better for me, but I do appreciate the reaction. I did have some folks reach out almost immediately like, "Hey, how can we help? How could we like can I bring you to my company? Can I do this? Can I do that?" So I am overly grateful for everyone who's like, "Oh my gosh, like we need this at my company ERG summit. Like you should be our keynote this year or can you teach a workshop here?" Or I shared this with my friends, other career coaches like, "Oh, I bought 10 books for my clients." So I was immediately like floored and excited. I still have a long way to go. A
Yeah.
long way to go, but it's interesting and that it's a long way, but it's not because of the work that I do. If a corporation hired me and it's like, oh, we're going to do like an ERG summit for 1,000 employees and they bought 1,000 books, that I could, if I do that 6 times, then I'm done. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's exciting. And I am so appreciative of people who believe in the work and are happy to share it with their company or with their friends.
Do you know that I give away a copy of every author who comes on this show's book? All you have to do to enter is subscribe to the podcast, review it, send me a screenshot at media@hustlingwriters.com and tell me which book you're entering for. And I might just be mailing you a copy of the book, but also you're helping me grow a show that I am so passionate about, so delusional about. I wanted to be on Times Square. I want to be interviewing the biggest and best authors, and I need all the help I can to get there. Your subscribe means the world. Your review means the world. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And let's resume with the episode. Yeah, well done. And well done for coming onto a podcast called My Rejection Story for someone who hates vulnerability.
I know I'm working on it. I'm stretching myself. I think I followed your work and listened to your work for a little bit. So I'm like, okay, she's not gonna like try and find my deepest, darkest secret. It's not like behind the wall on one of those Netflix like love reality shows where I feel like they bait the person with the question so that they get that piece that never is going to sound good as a soundbite. It didn't feel like that. So I was like, I can do it in a way that feels natural and feels good and also just stretch myself, right? I always tell my clients confidence comes from execution. You
Yeah,
don't get
yeah.
confident in doing anything until you do it because otherwise your mind just mystifies like the worst case scenario. Have you seen Inside Out 2, the
No, I have
movie?
not.
Okay, so Inside Out is one of my favorite movies, and
Okay.
it's a Disney movie about feelings. And in Inside Out 2, they introduce the feeling of anxiety to the main character Riley, and the depiction, and it's a it's an animated movie, but the depiction of anxiety, one of my favorite scenes in the movie is that they show these minions behind the scenes. So in her mind, they show like 1,000 minions coming up with the worst case scenario.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's how anxiety works for a lot of people. Like all your brain can do is think of all of the worst things that could happen. And I teach my clients like the only way you can take that away is by having positive, actual positive experiences through trying and noticing you did not die, you were not embarrassed, you are okay, and you're one step closer to the goal. So I always challenge myself. I guess I have my own minions, just like Inside Out, and my anxiety will be at an all-time high. I'm pretty sure my heart rate's probably at least 120 talking to you today.
No.
But when I get off the phone, I'll know I did not die. I'm okay.
Yeah, you're building that muscle. And I mean, I love that analogy, and it makes me think like what came up to mind. A couple of things came up to mind, but one of the things that came to mind is that when we do this work, so you work in as a career coach and like in career development, and you do keynotes, so you're generally an educator and very much a personal development space. I talk about rejection all the time. So if I take a rejection really personally and really struggle with it, I'm like, oh my gosh, like what a hypocrite. Like I talk about this stuff all the time. So why is it affecting me so much? So I wonder if there's any part of you that has that where you think that because you've been doing this work, which just to say, I think everyone struggles with it. Even if we've been doing the work, it's not going to be easy all the time. Like there's going to be things that trigger us. So I wonder if it's kind of what your kind of brain goes through, knowing that you do know a lot about this intellectually, but emotionally it's still affecting you.
Definitely. Um, I think it's always tough when, like, they have that quote, like, check on your strong friends. I think it's also like, check on your successful friends. By a lot of measure, I've been successful. Let me change that. By a lot of measures, I am successful. And I think when you've achieved a certain level of success, people put you in this like perfection box. So even if you say you're not doing well or you're upset about something, it's like, oh, it can't be that bad. Like you've already done A, B, C, and I haven't even done that yet. So like, girl, you're fine. Like, so I think that that creates this feeling of not being able to express yourself, not being able to share because you're not necessarily validated in your experience. And I think that I've dealt with that a lot. So in my own mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, like how did this happen to me? Like, I'm supposed to be successful. So it's the weight of the rejection of not getting what you want. And then also the weight of like, what are other people going to think? Like, what if I'm kicked off this throne that I didn't necessarily ask to be on? What are people going to think about me? And as a business owner, it's like, okay, so if they think bad things, does that mean I'm not going to be able to pay my bills because they're not
Yeah.
supporting me? But the reality is many times it humanizes you and people want to support you more when they know, oh my gosh, you're not perfect, Patty. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you have some grit, you've had some grind behind you. You understand how to navigate when things don't work out perfectly, but it never feels like that in your mind. So I 100% struggle with that.
Yeah, yeah. You said it so beautifully. It humanizes you, but I think very much a mission of this podcast is that people, when we talk, as you said, the Instagram highlight reel, when we talk about our businesses, our successes, is often a very much a highlight reel. Like you go on a podcast and you talk about everything that went well. And to the audience, this can be very relatable, especially if they're like not in your league. Like if I'm not relatable, sorry. If they're not in your league at all, if there's someone who's working a low paying job and really wants to start a business or whatever it is, and then they hear Kimberly Brown talking about like making X amount of money or doing X thing, it's like, that's not me. Like I'm not on her level. So what can I learn from this? Whereas I think seeing that very real human side of the person, it makes it, as you said, relatable and humanizes you. But it's scary. And you touched on something very interesting to me, which is a perfection box. I've never heard that term before. Yeah, what is a perfection box? I just want to like if you had to define it, and is it something you're aware of, kind of not being stuck in?
I think the perfection box, I think in the context that I use that term, um, and no one's asked me this question before. I think it's just this almost like the image of what people see when they look at you. So it's not necessarily how you feel about yourself, but it's all of the things that people use to describe you, what they think your personal brand is. And I think when you've had some level of success, people have an expectation of who you are, how you show up, what it feels like to be around you. And the interaction that they have with you then can either accept or deny whatever was in that box, right? It's like it says like, okay, this is exactly who you are. I accept it. Or you can ruin someone's experience if when they interact with you, it's not like that.
Yeah.
When I talk about personal branding, I joke and say that it's the experience you provide to anyone who interacts with you. So whenever I'm hired to do a keynote, I have a rule that whenever I'm in an environment where people, any participants from the program are able to interact with me, I'm on. It does not matter if I'm tired. It does not matter if I'm exhausted. If I just had a fight with my partner, it does not, none of that stuff matters because now I'm on. I don't wait to get on stage because there's so many interaction points. And honestly, but connecting the two together, it's like that perfection box of being the speaker who's on stage. People have an image of what that's supposed to be like. So
Yeah.
I want to make sure that they have a good experience because if someone meets me in an elevator and they try and say hi to me, but I'm in my like speaker zone, and I'm not as nice or as friendly, I always think about, well, what are they going to say when I get on stage then? They're like, oh, I just talked to her a few
Mm,
minutes ago and she wasn't nice at all. Like, I don't even know why she's here. Like, look at her up there smiling when she was stank in the elevator 2 minutes ago. So I always try and almost turn it on. But I think that in some instances, the perfection box, like being aware of what people think, can work to your advantage, but it also can create um, internal fatigue, internal struggle, and it can inhibit you being as vulnerable as you'd like to be and as honest as you'd like to be because you want to uphold that image versus really and truly being yourself.
Yeah, yeah. That's such a beautiful description. And what I'm thinking about is as you have climbed your career ladder, when you were working and now as an entrepreneur, you kind of are getting more and more put on a pedestal by people because you're like way up there. And I think that when we're earlier, like especially if you are like building a business and you have nothing behind you, like this, I started building a business straight out of university. So I had no reputation behind me. And it can feel a lot easier because you don't care about what people think of you, because no one thinks anything of you at all. Like there's no reputation to uphold. But being visible when people now have a perception of you is a lot harder and scarier, and especially being vulnerable in that sense, because now there are markers that people have for you. You know, you're an author and you've done this and this and this and this. So, yeah, what is your relationship right now with being in the public eye? And you've written tons of articles. You are very active on social media. You do keynotes, so you're very visible. So I'm just curious, kind of what that relationship is now.
It's so funny because I know I'm visible, but it doesn't feel like it because I feel like I'm so far from where I would like to personally be. But I have to
Mm.
acknowledge that where I am is different than a lot of other folks, right? Even though it's not at the height, because for some folks, they could be wanting to just get to my level. But I look at other folks and I'm like, I'm not allowed in XYZ room yet because I have not achieved XYZ, whatever that goal, metric, milestone is. So I think that it's like this mind warp of of reality for you versus reality for the person who's looking at you. Um, I think my goal in this season is just to make sure that I am as authentic as I possibly can be, because I don't want to reach any more levels of success or milestones or goals and feel like I'm upholding a standard that is not authentic to who I am, because it creates more dissonance like within myself. Like, so when I, in my last corporate job, I felt like I was a completely different person in my business than who I was in the office. And I had so much sadness when I came back to work because I felt like in my business and my company, I got to be the biggest, baddest version of myself. I got to truly shine and connect with people how I wanted to. It's like someone like took their foot off my back when I was working in my company. But then when I came back into the company doors, I felt like someone was like, oh, wait, hold on. Remember, you're not a VP yet. You're only a director. Let this person shine. You're not allowed to do this. It felt like someone was just trying to keep me in the box of my role. And that dissonance didn't feel good. So I think as an entrepreneur, I'm trying to make sure that the dissonance is really like who I am with my friends, my family, my partner, et cetera, versus like who I am outside. I'm trying to make sure that I don't feel the same way I felt when I was in that last job, which a lot of people may feel that way. I think there's always an element of code switching. My thing
Mm.
on code switching is always that we are always going to code switch a little bit. That's just natural. You can't be the way you are with your girlfriends, the way you are out in public. There's like I
Yeah.
curse. I definitely have a potty mouth, but you're not going to hear a curse word on this podcast. But I love using colorful language to express myself with my girlfriends, but you won't hear it here. I'm like, there's always going to be an element of that code switching. But it's how can we eliminate it in areas where it's not necessary and we
Yeah.
can just be ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's code switching in the sense of, you're not cursing when you're in the boardroom, but you will with your
Mhm.
girlfriends. But then there's also like compromising on like core values. That's, I think,
Exactly.
where it becomes really painful. If you are an
Yes.
advocate of social justice and at work you have to do things that are like morally corrupt to you and you care about that, that sucks. And that's going to like probably take a big toll. So would you say that's perhaps like a define as that you are true to your values in every area of your life?
Oh, 100%. I think I even have a chapter in my book on determining your core values because I think that many times my whole thing is like you can have a career that you love. But in order to have a career that you love, it's important that you're aligning to who you authentically are, what your core values are, so that you can show up as your best self every single day. We spend 40 plus hours a week at work. So if your job sucks, I'm honestly, your life kind of sucks because we can't make up those 40 plus hours a week. No matter how good the weekend is, it's really hard to make up Monday through Friday. And most of us in traditional corporate settings are working more than 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to make that up. So the more closely you are aligned with who you are, your core values, things that make you happy, and you can show up as authentically as you can, the better.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So in your book, you also talk about how important it is to take stock of past experiences. And you also share some great stories from your own experience of kind of working your ass off while working in the dorm, which is your very early career experience. Can you, for people who don't know, I guess I have two questions. I think let's start off with a brief synopsis of your book, and then I'll come back to it. But what your kind of early career trajectory looked like.
Oh gosh, okay. So we're going back. So the book in general, in short, so the book was written for anyone who's ever felt overlooked, underappreciated, underpaid in the workforce, and you want to take control of the trajectory of your career and build a 2-year career strategy to make your next move. That is the goal. At the end of the book, you will end up having a 2-year career strategy to make your next move. At the end of each chapter, each time we talk about a topic, I literally have a section called Your Next Move, which tells you what you need to do. So if you don't want to read my stories, you can just go to Your Next Move and
The
do the
stories are great, so
activities.
read
Yes,
those.
I would love if you read those too. But if you're busy and you're like, I need to make this career move now, you could just go to Your Next Move. Like, it's a very actionable read that can help you really position yourself to truly be happy in a career. I think early on in the book, I tell a lot of stories about my own stumbling blocks. So my first job, I was getting paid $25,000 a year, no benefits, mind you. So $25,000 a year after taxes is probably close to like 18. And I was living in Long Island, New York. I was broke as a joke. Broke. I had to decide, do I want Honey Nut or do I want regular Cheerios? I can't get Cheez-Its this week. Let me get popcorn. I think my diet at the time was probably like popcorn, Cheez-Its, and like a little bit of other stuff, but whatever was cheap and affordable. And my parents used to make me these like care packages sometimes go for like toilet paper. And I was so appreciative back then. But that was my first job. And I think when I moved to my next job where I worked as a banker, that goal was like, I just need more money. Like that's
Yeah,
all I
yeah.
needed. Because when I worked in that first job, it was more of like a data entry job. They marketed it as a marketing analyst. It was not. It was much more data entry. I was still working swing shifts at TGI Fridays. And a swing shift is like a 12 to 12. Because I do that on
Okay.
the weekends. And then when I still felt like I wasn't able to do what I needed to do, I wanted something a little lighter. So I also worked at Victoria's Secret Pink for a little time. So I had 3 jobs at one point where I keep my swing shift on a Saturday or Sunday because the tips were good. And then I'd work 1 or 2 nights in retail at Victoria's Secret Pink while I worked as a marketing analyst. And then I kept that job when I worked as a personal banker. And that was more of a
Wow.
sales job that I didn't necessarily love. Um, Sales has never been my thing. I know that it is necessary, but I love relationship building. So in my company, I'm a relationship seller. But back then, it was very like, you need to have this many points per month and do this to get this revenue. And I struggled in that role. And then I think the first move where I transitioned into a career that I loved, the last time I remembered being happy was in higher ed. So I worked as an assistant director of admissions. So it was kind of, admissions is kind of like sales. You're selling education, which felt better to me than selling loans and mortgages and investments. I actually really liked that job. The leadership in that university was a little tough. And I was also commuting. So I'm not sure if anyone listening is familiar with like the New York State area, but there's a lot of bridges and the bridges only go up, they never go down. So when you're commuting, at that time I was commuting from Long Island to the Bronx, the tolls had gone up and I took a pay cut from when I worked as a banker. So I was spending a good amount of money just to get to work every single day. And it was kind of tough. It was like, I'd be in schools at 7 a.m. doing fairs until like 7, 8 o'clock at night. I found a job on the other side of the bridge. And that's when I moved into career development. That was my first job as a career coach. And I spent 10 years there and then moved into corporate HR, where I served as the director of global diversity talent acquisition strategy at a finance company. And that's where I ended up ending my traditional career and moving into my business. But I've definitely had my own transitions across different industries, across different things.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing the career journey. So, what I took away from your stories is that there was a lot of risk involved in figuring out what you loved and what was going to
Yes.
light you up. And and also I think this speaks to kind of who you're helping in your book, because I know in your book, I think in your introduction, you talk about helping professionals who think it's too late to change. I'm 27 years old and I have friends who are 27, which I think is very young, who think it's too late to change something that they hate. So it seems like this is a mindset that many people in the 9 to 5 have about the jobs that they're in. And there's something terrifying about making these changes. But on the other side of risk is often like great things. So yeah, I'm curious to kind of know, like, for anyone who is scared of that risk, do you have kind of a process that you went through or that you help others through? Perhaps like an opportunity cost evaluation that they should make before being stuck in something they hate for decades. Yeah, what was your like kind of mental process when it comes to this?
So, first and foremost, it is never too late, period. I literally work with people in their 50s and 60s who want to spend their next 10 to 15 years before retirement doing something that they love because they've never done something that they love before. So they are, quote unquote, throwing away the career that they've had or reimagining what they've done to do what they'd actually like to do. So it is literally never too late. I think the mindset I've always had is that I don't want to regret not doing it. I don't want to look back a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years and be like, ah, darn, I should have just went for it. That's honestly how I made the decision for entrepreneurship. Yes, I had some income behind it. I didn't just like jump ship. So I had some income that I had saved up. So that was good for like at least 6 months. But for me, I was like, I want to try to stand on my own 2 feet as an entrepreneur. If I look back on this moment, I don't want to minimize all the work I put into my business to make more room for a 9 to 5. I want to try. And I would rather try and fail and have to circle the block and go back to doing what I was doing than to not try at all and just always have this idea, this mindset of like, oh my God, like I wish, and I'd be yearning after something. So I always encourage folks, what's the pain that you want to experience? Because you're going to have pain and discomfort right now, hating doing what you're doing and lusting after something else. Or do you want the pain of regret? Or do
Mm,
you want the pain of trying? And at
yeah,
least you're in it, like you're in the race. And you
yeah,
could always circle back. If you've done your due diligence, you build good relationships, you can always do it. You could even do phased approaches, like of how do you make this transition? I think I've always been someone who heavily researches, but I don't use research as a procrastination technique because it can become that. But I'm talking to people in the industry, I'm building relationships. I set myself up for as smooth as a transition as possible while also maintaining where I am to make sure I have those relationships in case something doesn't work out. Because the reality is, you're never going to know how it's going to be until you try it. You're never going to
yeah,
be confident in it until you actually do it. And it will be
yeah,
hard. When I moved from higher ed to corporate, I felt like these folks were speaking Japanese and I was speaking English. Like there were so many things in meetings, I was like, I don't even know what that anachronism means. Like I
yeah,
feel like an idiot. And I would like go back and Google or ask someone in a safe environment. There's going to be discomfort. So I think we need to let that go. Like it's going to be discomfort. It's going to be a little hard, but I would rather have the hardness and the challenge to potentially be good at something I want versus just stay someplace that I'm not happy.
yeah. I love that so much. That leaning into that discomfort of going into, a place where you don't know the acronyms goes back, I think, to that vulnerability because it is vulnerable. And I know you said you struggle with vulnerability, but you've been taking vulnerable steps your whole life. Like doing that is extremely vulnerable because there's a place where you are respected and you've got this esteem and everyone knows you in that space. And making a complete career shift means that you no longer have that reputation you've built up for yourself. The idea of also looking back at what you regret the most, I'm really glad you spoke about that because that's the exact mentality that I have. And
Yes.
I went through it with this podcast where I was like, for the first time, I'm investing money in something that's not giving me money. Like, I pay a team to do work to help me with the clients, and that's fine. That's not risky because the clients are paying me and then I'm
Hmm.
paying my team, and there's a very clear financial trajectory. But doing something like a podcast means I have no idea how it's going to go, but I'm also like, what will I regret more? Spending this money and it failing, or not doing it when I had such clarity because I wasn't sure if it would work or not. And it's very much, yeah, I would regret the latter, not the former. So I love that you spoke about that.
100%.
So tell me about the next book you're trying to work on and your journey with getting that book out into the world. I know you're in the process, and that's kind of what prompted that post you put up that left you with the vulnerability hangover.
Yes, yes. So it's funny because I'm going to tell you what I initially thought, and then I'll tell you what I think now. So I wrote a book proposal that is about a book that's about developing your leadership style. I think after you figure out where you want to go in the workplace, the next step that we need to start talking about is people leadership, how to manage up, down, and across an organization. I think many times we are thrown into jobs where we're managing people and have no idea how to. The last chapter that became the first chapter in my current book is serving as a people leader is not a rite of passage, it's a privilege. I thoroughly believe it is a privilege to manage others and have some stake in the trajectory of their career because a manager is one of the most influential people. But I think people don't understand the art of management, whether it's up, down, or across an organization, because we do manage our peers, we do have to manage up, and we do have to manage down sometimes. So the next book is about determining your authentic leadership style so you can understand how you like to work so you can communicate that to others and also understand how others like to work. So I've written the proposal, like talked to some folks about it, still having some conversations about it. But I will share, in the spirit of being vulnerable, that's what we're doing today. I'm also thinking about something around the concept of self-coaching. Because I think that when you have done all the things, you've attended all the conferences, you've had all the coaches. I think a lot of high achieving professionals find themselves in a place where they are struggling to take the actions that have been recommended that they take because you have so much information that's been input into your brain. I joke and tell folks that I don't think there's too many new things I could really learn in a lot of areas because I've invested in a lot of courses, I've gone to a lot of conferences, I've read a lot of books. And because of that, it gives you um, a little bit of procrastination out of fear because you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And I think after you're kind of set on your path, the next step is understanding how to coach yourself. So I think I'm going to experiment with some podcast content around the art of self coaching. But I definitely think that could be the third book down the line, or maybe the second. Who knows? If I get the right publisher, I'd love to sign a 2-book deal. So like
Yeah.
we're on the hook for the second one. But I definitely think that that concept is going to be something I'm going to write more and more and more about. I've kind of tested it on Instagram and my stories and in my newsletter. I'll be writing something on it soon. And even conversations, I'm seeing a lot of folks are feeling like that, oh my gosh, like self-coaching is something that I do. But the difference, I think, is that many people, yes, you coach yourself through mindset things, but people still aren't taking action. They still aren't doing the
Mm,
transformation. So what happens when you've done all the things, but you're still not where you'd like to be, but you have the resources? There's not that you need to invest more, is
yeah.
that you need to coach yourself to take action. And what does that
Well,
look
you
like?
kind of need to put the action in, like there's a lot of people who put money, throw money and then don't do that hard work that you need to do to get the coaching to work. So I
Exactly.
love that. I actually interviewed yesterday a literary agent for this podcast, and it'll be an upcoming episode. I think it'll come out after your episode. But she spoke about how it's much harder to get a book deal for sort of self help, professional development type of books versus other forms of nonfiction, like if it's
Hmm.
topical, current affairs, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Agents are more interested in that, or publishers are more interested in it than that. Therefore, agents are. So I just second to last question for you is getting that book deal. It is very rare for I think many thought leaders to get a traditional book deal for their nonfiction professional development book, and many of them opt for the self-publishing or the hybrid route. What was your journey with getting that first book deal?
So I have to say that it was an introduction. I got introduced to my publisher from someone who was currently working with them. So my process was very non-traditional. I had
Amazing.
the book idea. I had a rough like outline of how I wanted to approach it. I did not even write a full proposal, but I think that because of the brand that I had and how I was able to articulate what it was, I think the biggest difference with self-help is that it's like you have to understand like what is going to make this book different? What is the transformation that the reader is going to have? And make sure that it is like a deeper transformation that's grounded in something. And that's what I've seen, at least folks are interested in. Like what,
Mm,
and I've had to really be like, okay, it is different from this book because of this. What is my unique
yeah.
perspective? If you look at these 10 books that are all talking about making your next move in the workplace, why is
Yeah.
mine different, and making sure that that is crystal stinking clear.
Mm,
That is
mm,
what I found that agents are interested in. I think for me, my issue hasn't necessarily been that they weren't interested in the idea. It's the sales of the first book, which stinks because your first book, I feel like it could sometimes be easier to get your first deal when everything is on like the hopes of what you can do. But it's hard to get the second one if your first book didn't hit the numbers it was supposed to. Because now they're like, oh, if like the past is an indicator of future success, we don't like what the past looks like. So you have to kind of push up on it.
Well, everyone listening, order a copy of the book so that the second book can come out into the
Yes,
world.
please. Yes, please. I hope, I think my goal is to hopefully something will come out in maybe 2026 at this point, because it's almost the end of 2024. So hopefully by like 2026, the next one will come out.
Yes, yes, it's happening, and you're speaking into the existence. But
Yes.
thank you so much, Kimberly. This was so great. Okay, my final question is related not to you, it's to me. Um,
I love
I
it.
have, um, I want to grow this show, and I have a very small audience, and I have a big mission, and I have like an insane goal. Like one day, I want it to be on Times Square, which is very delusional and very vulnerable to even say on this
I
podcast. But
love
I'm also like
it.
trying to bring everyone along with the journey. I'm very, yeah, I'm obsessed with this mission. So my question for you is, as someone who has built a platform and done, a lot with getting your work out there, if you have any advice on what I should be doing to grow this show.
Oh my goodness. So I by no means, first and foremost, let me say, like, yes, I'm a podcaster too, but I by no means think that like I am like the authority on this, but I'll share what's worked for me. I think, and something that I'm working on moving forward, because I recently did a podcast consult with a known podcaster to kind of help me like work on my own show. We could talk like off the phone, yeah, off the recorded line about that. But I think since your podcast is heavily interviewing, it's who are you interviewing and how are you making sure that they're also marketing it too. I think with
Mm,
podcasting, one of the blessings and the curses that I hope that you don't experience, but a lot of people do, is that when you interview someone, they don't share the episode.
mm, mm.
And you're able to leverage someone else's audience. So by inviting someone on your show and interviewing, it's how can you make it easy for them to share, and even making sharing a requirement. Like if I'm taking the time to interview you, to give you this like spotlight and the shine and tell your story, how are they also sharing it? Whether that's accepting a collaboration post on Instagram or whatever else, but making it clear like what the expectations are afterwards. And also getting the best possible clips. For me, I've gone baby viral when I've caught the clips of either myself or it's someone who I'm interviewing. And it's just that perfect, like 30-second clip. And it just gets shared again and again and again and again and again. We live in a society that doesn't have the patience to even listen to a full episode sometimes.
Yeah,
But you can get folks if you get that perfect clip,
yeah,
and people are really excited. So I think it's keeping track of when your guests say something that's amazing. I generally like to take 2 or 3 clips per episode that are really good and make sure those are the things that I'm sharing. And then look at your analytics too and be like, okay, what episodes are doing best, so you can see what your readers or listeners, not readers, so what your listeners want to hear. I think it's really interesting when you get into the data and you can tell what type of people your audience likes to hear from. So for me, my audience loves folks who teach. My
mm,
solo
mm.
episodes have done the absolute best, like by far. But the episodes that even came in, I have 96 episodes of the podcast. So any guest episode that was ranked even a little bit better than the other things, they were always teaching my audience. Like my
Yeah,
folks
yeah,
like stories, but it's very clear like what you learned in the episode. Those are the ones that my guests respond to. And the difference is really big. It's not
yeah.
like, oh, like 10 views, it's hundreds of views difference when I have teachers versus people who just tell stories.
Yeah, that's a great point. These are such great tips. Thank you so much. And also, anyone listening, if you have a podcast, Kimberly just shared some fantastic tips, which is make it very easy to share. And I will say, what I do is I like to send a card to guests afterwards, and I also send them the assets. But as you said, like often it doesn't. Not everyone shares, and that's okay because I know that I'm getting very great guests, so I do appreciate their time. But those were really fantastic tips. So thank you so much again, Kimberly, for being here. anyone who's still listening, you can order a copy of Next Move, Big Move from your local bookstore, especially if in the US, or on Amazon. And there it is. I'm also giving away a copy to a listener who subscribes to the show. Just email screenshots to media@hustlingwriters.com. Thank you so much again, Kimberly.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Really, this was fantastic. I really appreciate your time. And yeah, it was so fun chatting to you.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Let me know if you need anything else.
This was My Rejection Story, hosted by me, Alice Draper. Thank you for listening to today's episode of My Rejection Story. I hope this conversation was as fun as I had recording it. I enjoy every episode. So just a reminder that you can win a copy of a book every single week. I do a giveaway of the author I interviewed. So if you love this conversation and you really want to grab your get your hands on a copy of the book, please enter the giveaway. All you have to do is subscribe and review the podcast and email me at media@hustlingwriters.com. And if you've already done it, you can do it from another app. And if you've already done it on all your apps, you could also just borrow a friend's phone, do it from a friend's phone, and let me know, like, on the screenshots that you did it on a friend's phone, because the more reviews and subscribes, the more likely I am to grow the show and make this podcast even bigger and better than it is, perhaps even get some funding, be able to invest money back in the show, and really just deliver on my promise to you, which is to make this as good as I can. So I just want to say a huge thank you quickly to my team, Christina Schild, Samantha Dubé, and Chechofacho Ndabane. This show would not be here if it wasn't for them and their tireless work and belief in this mission. And then a huge thank you to the distribution partners. So there are some amazing people out here trying to get the word out to their networks, and also people that I think you will find extremely helpful, because if you want to write a book and get a book out there, these are experts in book writing and book publishing. So a couple of writing coaches who are highly recommended in my field: Emily Tameo Maher, Lindy Feel, Tracy Stewart, and Javasia Harris Bowler are all highly recommended writing coaches. And I know so many people who have used writing coach, and it's really helped them get the word out there and get the book out there and not just stay stuck in that draft phase. So their details are all in the show notes. And then also Nick Courtwright is the CEO of a hybrid publishing house, which is an interesting way of publishing a book, and it's highly recommended. Many of my clients have gone through it with great success. You can find out all of Nick's details in the show notes as well. And if you have any questions about them or need their contact details because for some reason you can't find them, pop me an email. And thank you again for listening to the show. I'll see you next week for another conversation. And yeah, have a great Wednesday.